I remember every detail how my story began. That day seemed ordinary, but inside me something whispered that the world was about to witness what my hands would do. From the outside, everyone saw me as just another person, but inside me a darkness stirred that would not be tamed. It all started with small things. The first time I realized I could get what I wanted without consequences. That feeling was strange, cold yet electrifying. Every day, every encounter, every gesture taught me about people, their habits, their trust, and I knew that trust would become my most powerful weapon. An unexplainable thrill surged within me as I began meticulously planning every step. I studied the person who would become my next target. How they interacted with others, their daily routines, even the way they smiled, all became crucial information. My mind played the scenario over and over, rehearsing every movement, every word until it became flawless. I moved swiftly and precisely, preparing everything I would need. I interacted with people so that no one suspected, no one noticed. It was as if the world itself was a stage, and I was both the director and the actor, unseen strings guiding everyone else. Nothing happened without that intoxicating sense of control. When the time came to make the first move, I felt a strange freedom. No hesitation, no hidden emotion. In that moment, everything was clear. I and my plan stood facing each other, just a few steps apart. I advanced with structure and cold logic. Honestly, it felt as though I wasn't in control. The darkness within me breathed through my actions, allowing me to do what had to be done. That sensation stayed with me until the very end. At first, it seemed minor, a small act, but once the action began, it escalated quickly. I felt the effect of every move like dominoes. I pushed one and the others followed inevitably. When it was over, I stood on the edge of calm and horror, feeling a wave of conflicting emotions. The horror in their eyes, those I had surrounded, made it real, yet the darkness within me did not leave, it deepened. I was wrong if I thought it all went unnoticed. Experts and law enforcement began tracing my steps, analyzing every minor action until my deeds became a crime story that everyone would remember. A mixture of power, cunning, and helplessness flooded me as I realized how deep I had gotten into the lives of those I deceived, and how powerless they had been to stop me. But the law, delayed though it may have been, eventually drew closer. I remember the moment they found me. At that moment, I felt the deepest darkness inside me, the darkness that had always followed, now standing face to face. A strange calm, yet a mixture of darkness and freedom at the same time. The story ended, but the memories of horror and shadows remained in my mind, repeating endlessly like an unsolvable puzzle. And now I know that no matter how perfect an action seems, eventually the light of truth will uncover it, and every shadow will emerge from hiding. I learned to wear the face the world expected. Smiles were a costume, words a script. I cultivated ordinary rituals, coffee at the same corner, polite nods to neighbors, small talk that dissolved suspicion. People praised my reliability, my calm. They could not have known that beneath those ordinary habits, a darker choreography was rehearsing itself. There were nights I would lie awake listening to the silence, savoring the taste of being unseen. The mind left unchecked becomes a theater of possibility. I allowed it to play out every scene, not to learn new methods, but to savor the control of foreknowledge. I knew the cadence of footsteps in the house I studied. I knew when my mark would lock the door, where he kept the spare key, the rhythm of his breathing as he read, the lull of his sleep. I never wrote these things down. Memory served as both instrument and altar. It is dangerous to be invisible and to desire visibility at once. I wanted to be known for what I had done only in the sense that my deed would echo. Not for the praise of strangers, but for the certitude that I had altered the weave of someone's life so profoundly that no one could ever pretend the world remained whole as before. The paradox sustained me. The need to hide and the craving to be understood, if only after the act, by some part of the witness world. There were practicalities I never spoke aloud. I observed patterns rather than diagrams. I watched how grief bent people's shoulders and how the police moved through neighborhoods, how the press liked neat narratives. When the news wanted a villain, they sought a face that fit a headline. I was cautious of making visible mistakes that could be traced to me, but I was not meticulous about technique out of fear of exposure. I was meticulous out of ritual, out of devotion to the performance itself. The act became a liturgy. When the emergency sirens finally came, a distant wail that felt both inevitable and shockingly personal, my first sensation was not panic. It was clarity, a cold mathematical calm. The sirens did not scream at me, they confirmed the world's narrative had turned. Somewhere, someone had discovered the rupture I had created. I watched the news in fragments as though reading a book that described someone I once adored. I listened to the voices of anchors, their cadence, their attempt to stitch sense and horror together. Investigation is not only the work of forensics and detectives. It is also the gradual convergence of human attention. People who had not known they were witnesses found themselves noticing the shadow on a fence, the unfamiliar car at the end of a street, the way a neighbor's laugh was suddenly brittle. The net tightened not because of a single trace, but because many small, unremarkable facts placed side by side formed a silhouette. They made a puzzle where the missing piece began to look less like absence and more like an outline you could finally trace. I remember the day when a reporter knocked on my neighbor's door asking questions that seemed, to that neighbor, like idle curiosity. The neighbor remembered a detail, an oddity no one else had noticed. It was trivial, almost laughable, but in that triviality lay a vector. The police, patient and methodical, followed that vector into records, into patterns, into phone logs and receipts and moments where my carefully constructed normalcy left faint echoes. They did not arrive as avenging angels, but as a cumulative reason. Clerks, analysts, detectives, each contributing a thin strand until the strand became a rope. When they came to my door, they did it politely, behind an official shield. The knock itself unsettled me in a way nothing else could. For all my rehearsals, no rehearsal can perfectly simulate the sensation of a knock that contains an entire institution's attention. My palms sweated despite the practiced calm I had fashioned. My tongue felt thick. I met them with the same composed expressions I had used for the world. That composure lasted until they described why they were there, until the facts of the day were recited aloud in the neutral currency of police procedure. They asked questions I expected and some I did not. I answered with trained ambiguity, a scholar of misdirection, and yet in the cracks of my voice, in the small misplacement of a word, they found the nuance that opened doors to new lines of inquiry. There were interviews, photographs, the sorting through of mundane artifacts from my life that suddenly seemed less like possessions and more like evidence charting a pattern of presence. Surrender came not in a theatrical confession, but in the slow erosion of options. I remember the small, humiliating indignity of handcuffs. The cool metal around my wrists felt like an objective punctuation mark at the end of a soliloquy I had been performing alone for too long. The ride to the station was long in a way I had not imagined. Time, which used to be my ally, stretching and bending to accommodate my arrangements, now lay measured and tight. Every minute a wait. In the interrogation room, light was a tool. They turned it low, then bright, then low again, as if to remap my internal geography. I sat across from people who did not need to shout. Their questions arrived like weather, inevitable and patient. I denied, I deflected, I watched them watch me. There were moments I felt the old thrill, the sense of shaping perception. But those flickers were tempered by a new, raw fear. How visible I had become in the eyes of those who could lock me away. Evidence is not only DNA or fingerprints, it is witness memory sharpened by cross-examination. It is an unassuming receipt that ties a person to a place and a time. It is the way small repetitions, once unnoticed, reveal pattern when placed in sequence. The detectives, like composers, began to form motifs and themes. State files were note-ping out a score, a life mapped against a timeline, aligning with events the public was beginning to name with a kind of trembling clarity. At trial, the theater of law itself unfolded. I watched rooms that had once been spaces of ordinary interactions, courthouses, witness stands, even the halls where jurors moved, become stages where a community negotiated meaning from pain. The prosecution did its work with surgical patience, the defense with intellectual vigor. Witnesses told stories that were simple and wrenching. Someone remembering a knock that had not belonged, a neighbor describing a face seen in the wrong light, a friend explaining a text message that, in another context, might have been a joke. The gallery was full of faces. Some wore grief, others a grim curiosity. I sat in a chair that seemed to swallow me, feeling visible in a way I had never intended. The law demanded narrative clarity, motives, means, opportunity. The jury listened, weighing testimony, watching the slow architecture of evidence. It was not the drama I had once fantasized about. It was the relentless, patient accrual of fact. Conviction arrived through that patience. When the verdict was read, words that would be replayed in news cycles, transcribed into official records. I experienced a cascade of sensations. A sinking realization, an unexpected loneliness. The image I had rehearsed in the theater of my mind, grand, almost mythic, collapsed into the cold wording of judgment. The sentence was given. The institutions had done what they had promised to do. Years within prison are not mere repetition of days. They are a slow, corrosive process that rearranges the self. The routines of the block, the wakefulness of nights, the rhythm of mealtimes, the conversations with guards who speak in ways that become a new kind of mundane, these became my new life world. Existence narrowed to the scale of a cell and the scale of inner reckoning. Time alters memory. People imagine that once captured, the mind becomes contrite, easily folding into confession and repentance. For some, that is true. For me, truth emerged as a complicated thing, sometimes a sharp moral recognition, other times a stubborn defense of the impulses that had once seemed inevitable. I tried to map the inner mechanics of my own mind to find the hinge of the thing that made me act. Was it emptiness? Rage? A hunger for dominion? The answers were never neat. I wrote in a notebook at first, letters to myself that were less about confession and more about staying intact amid the slow erosion of identity. Pages filled with lists with small acts of observation, the way light hit the wall at noon, the bird that sang outside the high fence, the way another prisoner tidied his bed. I made a record because memory can be a defense against the fog. In those pages, sometimes remorse appeared like a thin, palimpsest line over old writing. Sometimes there was only the cold observation of cause and effect. Outside, the world moved on. News cycles advanced to other horrors, other spectacles. Families tried to rebuild their lives, sometimes finding solace in truth, sometimes living with a bitterness that never entirely healed. Memorials appeared, small gestures of attention that mattered because they promised the victims a name and an enduring presence in memory. There were letters I read in the visiting room that pierced me. Words not of hatred, but of questions. Why, they asked, why my child? Why our mother? Such questions do not invite answers that provide comfort. The public's appetite for morbid curiosity is a strange thing. Some people studied the case as if it were an object of study to be dissected for entertainment. Others treated it as an ethical boundary, a source of anger and sorrow. In the years after, documentaries and books would describe the trail of evidence, the bureaucratic patience, the emotional devastation. Analyses attempted to stitch meaning from chaos, to place my story into larger narratives about society, psychology, and predation. Legal systems have rituals for closure, sentencings, parole hearings, apologies read aloud. Yet closure is often elusive. The family of those I harmed navigated a life forced into two tracks, moving forward while never quite leaving behind the rupture. They adjusted routines, created new habits, yet the memory of loss remained an ache like a rock in a shoe, always felt, seldom mentioned. I sometimes wondered about meaning. In prison libraries, I read accounts of others who had walked similar paths. Some offered self-analysis with brutal honesty. Others found frameworks, psychology, environment, trauma, that tried to explain the trajectory toward violence. Explanation is not the same as excusal, but it can be a map for prevention. I took in those pages not to find absolution, but to seek bones of truth. What could the mind's mechanics tell me about the man I had been? In rare moments of visitation, when the thin plastic barrier separated me from a face that still remembered, I experienced a peculiar compaction of time. Memory condensed into a single snapshot. A kitchen table, a laugh, the small domestic gestures that once had meaning. How fragile the moments that make a life. So easy to break, so hard to repair after the fact. Remorse complicated itself with pride and shame, with defensive narratives and humble breaks. For some crimes, confession and contrition follow, sometimes genuine, sometimes strategic. My own interior landscape was messy. I recognized harm and sometimes wished for a chance to reclaim a different path. Yet I also carried the awareness that such reclamation is not possible for the lives I had altered. The recognition generated a new kind of responsibility, to speak, to participate in truth where I could, to avoid repeating pattern. After a while, the system offered space for limited exchange, letters, recorded interviews for research, sometimes meetings with professionals studying criminal behavior. I agreed to speak on certain conditions, not to sensationalize, but to offer parts of the truth that might aid understanding. Each conversation was a negotiation of privacy, of authority, of the right to narrate what had been done and why. I was not absolved by telling. I was perhaps rendered more accountable in the public record. Even now, when I think of that time, I see how human systems, detectives, journalists, neighbors, combined their separate, often mundane acts to form something like justice. It was not a single heroic moment that trapped me, but the slow accretion of attention, of memory, of a society that noticed. That is both encouraging and terrifying. Encouraging because it shows how collective vigilance can protect. Terrifying because it shows how fragility can be leveraged by someone who studies it. The story I lived is now retold in quiet rooms and in loud broadcasts. People dissect those minutes and days, making of them moral tales, cautionary studies, and sometimes entertainment. I have no right to resent how my life is narrated now. I traded the right to anonymity for actions that demanded a public accounting. Still, there is a lingering question about how prevention might look, about how early signals could be recognized, about how lives can be reoriented before they become tools of harm. Regret, in its most honest form, is an urging toward repair that can never be complete. I write this now as an attempt at such repair, small and inadequate as it may be. Perhaps future listeners will hear not only the drama but the human lesson, that the edges of ordinary lives hide dangers when solitude and entitlement mix, that communities must cultivate the capacity to notice and to care, that justice is a process that requires patient work by many hands. And so I sit with the knowledge that my name has been written into a catalog of horror, that my actions became a template for grief and a study for prevention. I live with the consequence as an ever-present companion. Memory of the faces remains, and sometimes it is unbearable. At other times, it is a spur toward telling the truth and supporting others who study the dark places of the human soul, so that fewer lives will be shattered in the future. If there is one last thing to say, it is this: I was not born monstrous. The trajectory that led me here wound through small betrayals of empathy, through habit and arrogance, through a willingness to place myself above another's life. That knowledge does not free me from culpability, nor should it. It does, however, demand that those who hear this story consider how to build societies that recognize early signals, that offer support where emptiness grows into menace, that teach the value of every life so that fewer people slip into the logic that once carried me away. The story ends with the simple facts of the world: prison walls, daylight that bleeds into dusk, a cheap mattress, the tick of a clock. That is the world I inhabit now. The voices on the news move on. Sometimes in the quiet, I imagine a different ending, a life mended, a choice made otherwise. It is a fantasy without redemption for those harmed, but also a moral compass pointing outward. If learning from this is possible, let it be a lesson toward prevention, empathy, and the patient work of noticing the fragile threads before they snap. I close with no theatrical flourish, only a steady recognition that actions have weight, that lives intertwine, and that what I did cannot be undone. The law pronounced judgment, society remembers, and the survivors hold the truth of what happened in their living bodies. If my words here can help even one mind to change course, then some small usefulness might be wrested from what I have done. But I know that usefulness cannot erase the night I made, nor the faces I altered forever.